Welcome to California in Focus. I'm Eliana Kernodle. Governor Gavin Newsom announced new funding for mental health and substance abuse treatment and made some bold claims. Joining me to tell us more is the Center Square's Kenneth Schrupp. Kenneth, what did the governor say and how does it actually play out in the numbers?
Hi, Eliana. Newsom announced California as a, quote, national model for homelessness while he was announcing the availability of new applications for grant funding under something called Prop 1, which was a ballot measure passed in March with just 28,000 votes out of the 7.2 million ballots cast that created a $6.4 billion bond for building about 36,000 behavioral health beds and outpatient treatment slots and funding homeless housing. California's homeless population was 181,399 in January of 2023. We don't have the 2024 numbers yet, but that is the largest homeless population in the nation. Of course, this makes sense given that California is the largest state in the nation, but our ratio of homeless to population is one of the highest as well. However, all of this in mind, if Governor's Prop 1 does actually work out as intended, it could be an extremely cost-effective homelessness solution compared to some of the earlier programs that we have been funding. We spent about $24 billion in homelessness over the last 5 years as the homeless population has only continued to rise. Meanwhile, if we were to use Prop 1 cost estimates as a baseline, we could actually build treatment beds for the entire homeless population at $31 billion, and it would cost about $6 billion in annual treatment.
So you mentioned this bond and the cost, but interest is also a consideration. So how much is this bond actually going to cost?
If we're going to use the state's major bond issuance late last year as an indication, we'll probably pay about 3.3% on 30-year bonds that we take out for this. That probably gives us an interest cost of $6.3 billion, meaning that to create $6.4 billion in spending today, we're going to spend $6.3 billion on interest, which means the total cost is going to be about $12.7 billion. But of that $6.4 billion, we got $1 billion going towards housing homeless veterans. Another $1 billion is going to go towards housing homeless individuals with behavioral health problems. And the remaining and bulk amount of $4.4 billion is going to be spent on a mix of treatment and housing as grants administered under the Behavioral Health Services Act. Prop 1 renamed the Mental Health Services Act, which is this tax that we created on income over $1 million. It raises a few $1 billion each year, and that mostly goes towards county-administered mental health programs. But through this renaming and changing of the Mental Health Services Act to the Behavioral Health Services Act, state government is now requiring that counties spend 30% of their Mental Health Services Act funding on housing for individuals with behavioral health conditions. This is why counties, many of them oppose this bill because they'd have to spend, as the largest mental health providers in the state, aside from the prisons, would have to spend 30% of their limited mental health funding on housing for largely homeless individuals. Regardless, it does seem that the whole goal of Prop 1 is to create a lot of housing and a lot of mental health treatment facilities.
So there's a lot of talk about housing, but what about actually getting individuals into this housing?
Prop 1 was passed as a pair with another bill called SB 34. Prop 1, funding mechanism, voters had to approve it. Bill SB 34 expanded conservatorship. There were the definition of conservatorship qualifications, which is when the state appoints someone to oversee a person's care and needs, to include people who can't provide for themselves due to severe substance abuse or mental health or behavioral issues. So you can now have somebody who is deemed by the state by evidence of them being homeless and being unable to care for their basic needs, whether due to one of the three conditions above, substance abuse, behavioral, or mental health issues, to be able to put someone by court order into getting treatment. Court-ordered treatment is coming to California. After disappearing in the 60s under Governor Ronald Reagan, in the 60s, and 70s all across the nation, there's this book and later Oscar-winning movie called One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest about how, one sane person's horrible experience being trapped in these mental institutes that we used to keep people in. Then Governor Reagan, President JFK, There's a huge bipartisan effort across the entire country to empty out and eliminate forced treatment of people. But the end result has been to have little means of forcing mentally ill people on the streets to get treatment. And Prop 1 creates the space for them, and SB 34 created the mechanism to get them into treatment.
If everything goes according to plan, it sounds like this could actually be a pretty effective way of responding to homelessness, but how likely is it to pan out?
Right. If this goes according to plan, Newsom really might have a, quote, national model for homelessness. There's two factors here to really look at. A, the treatment side. If we're using Project Home Key as an estimate for how much we're going to spend treating each person, and about $30,000 a year, it's a pretty efficient program. The real question comes into housing, though. You're building the initial treatment slots. We typically will see costs double almost for housing for the homeless. In Los Angeles, we thought we'd be spending, low few $100,000s to develop each supportive housing unit for homeless individuals. Ended up costing double that. If that sort of cost inflation holds true, the building starts to look very expensive. We can only help half as many people. But if we can actually get the initial construction done, the ongoing support services will probably end up being rather affordable and much cheaper than the HUD estimated $53,000 that every homeless individual consumes in local services a year. We just have to make that initial investment into creating the treatment capacity.
Well, I'm sure you will continue to follow this story as it develops and we see how the building process goes. Thank you for your insights on this story. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.
Knowledge is power, and you deserve to know what happens in your state government. That's why the Center Square's reporting zeroes in on state authorities publishing stories that show where your money goes and who spends it. The Center Square gives power to the taxpayer by tracking politicians' use of the people's money and demanding transparency from state-run agencies. This is how the Center Square equips you, the American taxpayer, to hold your state government accountable. Sign up now for your state's Center Square newsletter at thecentersquare.com.